In a small, sleepy town where everyone knew each other by name, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. People went about their days with little drama, working, chatting over coffee, or catching up at the local bar after work. It was the kind of place where nothing exciting ever seemed to happen. But one evening, everything changed in ways no one could have anticipated. The story begins with a man named Ravi, who lived a simple life as a mechanic. He wasn't rich, but he was well liked in the community for his friendly nature and hard-working attitude. Ravi spent most of his days fixing cars at his garage, which was tucked away on the edge of town. By evening, he'd head to Joe's bar, a cozy spot where locals gathered to unwind. It was here that the events leading to the unforgettable incident unfolded. That particular night, Ravi had just finished a long day at work. His hands were still stained with grease, but he didn't mind. All he wanted was to relax with a cold drink and share some laughs with his friends. As usual, he found himself sitting at his favorite corner table surrounded by familiar faces. The atmosphere was lively, filled with jokes and stories exchanged between sips of beer. Ravi was in high spirits, cracking witty remarks that made everyone laugh. But not far from their group, trouble was brewing. Two rookie cops had walked into the bar, both fresh out of training and eager to prove themselves. They were young, inexperienced, and hungry for authority. Their uniforms gave them an air of importance, but beneath it lay uncertainty about how to handle real-world situations. Scanning the room, they noticed Ravi's group laughing loudly and decided it was the perfect opportunity to assert their dominance. One of the officers approached Ravi's table, his tone sharp and accusatory. "You folks need to keep it down," he said, glaring at Ravi. "This isn't your living room." Ravi looked up, surprised by the sudden interruption. "We're just having a good time," he replied calmly. "No harm done." His friends nodded in agreement, sensing no reason for alarm. But the officer wasn't satisfied. Perhaps it was the stress of being new on the job, or maybe it was the pressure to look tough in front of his partner. Whatever the reason, he pressed further. "I said, quiet down," he barked, louder this time. The mood shifted instantly. What had been a cheerful gathering now felt tense and uncomfortable. Ravi raised an eyebrow, his patience wearing thin. "There's no rule against enjoying ourselves," he shot back, his voice tinged with sarcasm. "Or did I miss the memo?" His comment only fueled the officer's frustration. Embarrassed by the challenge to his authority, he snapped. Before anyone realized what was happening, he announced that Ravi was under arrest for causing a disturbance. The second officer quickly joined in, grabbing Ravi's arm and twisting it behind his back. "You think you're funny?" The first cop sneered as they slapped handcuffs on him. "Let's see how funny you are in a cell." Ravi's friends watched in stunned silence, unsure of what to do. None of them could believe what was unfolding right before their eyes. The arrest felt excessive, almost absurd. After all, Ravi hadn't done anything wrong. Yet there he was, being dragged out of the bar like a criminal while the officers mocked him. "Bet you'll think twice before running your mouth next time," one of them taunted as they shoved him into the patrol car. As the vehicle pulled away, Ravi stared out the window, anger bubbling inside him. He couldn't understand why this was happening. Sure, he'd cracked a joke or two, but nothing that warranted such harsh treatment. Little did he, or the officers, know, this wasn't going to end quietly. Unbeknownst to them, Ravi came from a family with deep roots in the military. His father, a retired general, was a man whose name commanded respect across the country, and when word of this injustice reached him, things were about to get complicated for everyone involved. This opening sets the stage for the rest of the story, drawing readers into a world where ordinary lives collide with extraordinary circumstances. With tension building and questions lingering, the audience is left eager to find out what happens next. The patrol car ride to the station was anything but pleasant. Ravi sat in the back seat, his hands cuffed behind him, replaying the events of the evening in his mind. He couldn't shake off the feeling of humiliation, not because he thought he'd done something wrong, but because the whole situation felt so unfair. The officers in the front seat exchanged smirks, clearly pleased with themselves for teaching him a lesson. Their mocking tone continued as they made snide comments about how people like Ravi needed to learn their place. When they arrived at the police station, Ravi was led inside and booked without much explanation. The process felt cold and impersonal, like he was being treated as just another number rather than a human being. His mugshot was taken and his fingerprints were recorded. All the while, Ravi kept quiet, trying to stay calm despite the rising frustration bubbling within him. He knew losing his temper wouldn't help, but it didn't make the experience any easier to swallow. News traveled fast in the small town. By morning, word of Ravi's arrest had spread like wildfire. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers were talking about what had happened at Joe's bar. Some were shocked, others angry, and a few skeptical, wondering if there was more to the story than met the eye. But one person who wasn't surprised by the buzz was Ravi's father. A retired general known for his discipline and integrity, he had built a reputation not only in the military but also among civilians. When he heard about his son's arrest, over breakfast his expression hardened. "Arrested? For what?" he asked sharply, looking at his wife, who had picked up the phone call from one of Ravi's friends earlier that morning. She explained what little she knew, that Ravi had been accused of causing a disturbance and mocked by 2 officers during the arrest. The general listened intently, his jaw tightening with every detail. It wasn't the first time someone in the family had faced challenges due to their name or status, but this was different. This wasn't about pride. It was about justice. Without wasting a moment, the general got dressed in his formal uniform, a crisp shirt adorned with medals earned through years of service, and headed straight to the police station. Along the way, he called the police chief, requesting an immediate meeting. His tone was calm but firm, leaving no room for refusal. The chief, recognizing the caller's voice and rank, agreed instantly, though unease crept into his demeanor. He knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary conversation. Meanwhile, Ravi spent the night in a holding cell, unsure of what awaited him. The space was cramped and uncomfortable, with nothing but a thin bench to sit on. As dawn broke, he stared at the barred window, wondering when or if he'd get out. He hadn't been allowed to make a phone call yet, and the isolation weighed heavily on him. Thoughts of his father crossed his mind. Would he intervene? Part of Ravi hoped so, but another part worried about drawing too much attention to the situation. He didn't want special treatment because of his dad's accomplishments. Back at the station, the general arrived promptly, his presence commanding instant respect. Officers stopped mid-conversation as he walked in, his posture upright and his gaze steady. Even those unfamiliar with him could sense the authority he carried. He asked to speak with the chief privately, and within minutes they were seated in the latter's office. The general wasted no time getting to the point. "I'm here about my son," he began, his voice measured yet powerful. "From what I've heard, he was arrested last night under questionable circumstances." The chief shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Sir, we're still gathering details," he replied cautiously, "but I assure you we'll look into this thoroughly." The general nodded, appreciating the response but making it clear that words alone wouldn't suffice. "This isn't just about my son," he said, leaning forward slightly. "It's about accountability. If rules were broken, action must follow. And if mistakes were made, they need to be corrected, not swept under the rug." As the meeting continued, the general emphasized the importance of fairness and transparency. He didn't demand favors or threaten retaliation, but his unwavering stance sent a strong message. By the end of their discussion, the chief promised to launch an internal investigation into the incident. Satisfied for now, the general left the station, his next steps already forming in his mind. Word of the general's visit quickly reached the officers involved in Ravi's arrest. Panic set in as they realized the magnitude of their actions. What had started as a routine exercise of authority had spiraled into something far bigger than they'd anticipated. They huddled together, discussing their options. One suggested reaching out to their superiors for guidance, while the other argued that admitting fault might save them from further trouble. Both knew, however, that whatever happened next, their careers hung precariously in the balance. For Ravi, the day dragged on endlessly. Though he remained clueless about his father's intervention, He couldn't ignore the sudden flurry of activity around the station. Officers whispered nervously as they passed his cell, glancing at him with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Something was brewing, and Ravi could feel it in the air. Little did he know the wheels of change were already turning, sparked by a father's determination to protect his child and uphold justice. This part of the story keeps readers engaged by diving deeper into the emotional and practical fallout of the arrest. With tension rising and stakes growing higher, the narrative builds anticipation for what comes next. By late afternoon, the buzz around Ravi's arrest had grown louder, not just in the town but beyond its borders. News outlets, always on the lookout for stories that could capture public attention, caught wind of the incident. Reporters descended upon the small town like bees to honey, eager to dig into the details. Their cameras and microphones became fixtures outside the police station, turning what was once a quiet corner of the world into a chaotic scene. For Ravi, still stuck in his holding cell, the sudden media frenzy felt surreal. He could hear the commotion from inside, voices shouting questions, footsteps echoing down the hallways, and phones ringing nonstop. Occasionally, an officer would pass by his cell, muttering something about how this has gotten out of hand. Ravi couldn't help but wonder, how did things escalate so quickly? One moment, he was just another guy having a drink with friends. The next, he was at the center of a national conversation. The two officers who had arrested him were now under intense scrutiny. They hadn't expected their actions to blow up this way. In fact, they initially thought they'd be praised for taking charge and maintaining order. Instead, they found themselves dodging reporters' questions and avoiding eye contact with colleagues. The weight of the situation pressed down on them as they realized their careers, and possibly their freedom, were on the line. Their panic reached a tipping point when footage from Joe's bar surfaced online. Someone in the bar had recorded the entire incident on their phone, capturing not only Ravi's calm demeanor, but also the officer's aggressive behavior and mocking remarks. The video went viral almost instantly, sparking outrage across social media platforms. Viewers couldn't believe what they were seeing. Comments flooded in, criticizing the officers for abusing their power and calling for accountability. As the video gained traction, public opinion shifted dramatically against the officers. People began organizing protests outside the police station, demanding justice for Ravi. Signs read phrases like, "Fair treatment for all," and "Abuse of power must end." Locals joined forces with activists from nearby cities, amplifying the message. For many residents, this wasn't just about Ravi anymore. It was about standing up against systemic issues that had long gone unaddressed. Inside the station, tensions ran high. The police chief called an emergency meeting with senior staff to discuss damage control. Everyone knew this was a critical moment, not just for the department but for the town itself. If handled poorly, the fallout could tarnish their reputation permanently. The chief stressed the importance of transparency and accountability, promising swift action. But behind closed doors, there was disagreement about how far they should go. Some argued for leniency toward the officers, citing their inexperience as a mitigating factor. Others pushed for strict consequences, warning that anything less would fuel further unrest. Meanwhile, Ravi's father continued to play a pivotal role in shaping the narrative. After leaving the police station earlier that day, he didn't retreat into silence. Instead, he decided to address the growing public interest head-on. Dressed in his military uniform, he held a brief press conference outside his home. With reporters crowding around him, microphones thrust forward, he spoke with clarity and conviction. "This isn't about revenge or privilege," he said, his voice steady. "It's about ensuring that everyone is treated fairly, regardless of who they are." His words resonated deeply with the audience. Here was a man who had dedicated his life to serving his country, yet he wasn't asking for special treatment for his son. He simply wanted justice, a concept that struck a chord with people from all walks of life. Social media lit up again, this time with messages of support for the general and calls for reform within law enforcement agencies. But not everyone agreed with the general's approach. Some critics accused him of using his influence to overshadow local authorities. Why should one person have so much power? They asked. Others defended him, arguing that it took someone of his stature to bring attention to such injustices. Debates raged online and offline, reflecting the broader societal divide over issues of power, authority, and fairness. Amidst the chaos, Ravi remained caught in the middle. Friends visited him briefly at the station, updating him on the developments. They told him about the protests, the video, and his father's press conference. At first, Ravi felt a mix of emotions: relief that people cared, frustration over the unwanted spotlight, and guilt for causing trouble for his family. But as the hours passed, something shifted within him. Listening to his friends recount the community's response, he realized this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about something bigger, a chance to spark meaningful change. That night, as the lights dimmed in the holding cell, Ravi lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. Would the officers face consequences for their actions? Could this incident lead to real reforms in policing? And most importantly, how could he turn this negative experience into something positive? These questions swirled in his head, keeping sleep at bay. Little did Ravi know, the answers would come sooner than expected. By morning, the police department had announced disciplinary measures against the 2 officers involved. Both were suspended, pending a full investigation into their conduct. Additionally, the chief unveiled plans to implement stricter training programs focused on de-escalation techniques and ethical decision-making. While some hailed these steps as progress, others remained skeptical, questioning whether they would truly address the root causes of the problem. For Ravi, the news brought a sense of closure, but also a newfound responsibility. As the face of this movement, however unintentional, he knew he couldn't let the momentum fade. This was his opportunity to make a difference, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. And, though he didn't yet know exactly how, he was determined to seize it. This part of the story keeps readers hooked by exploring the ripple effects of Ravi's arrest and highlighting the emotional and societal stakes. With tensions rising and resolutions beginning to take shape, the narrative sets the stage for even more compelling developments. The days following the announcement of the officer's suspension were a whirlwind for everyone involved. The small town, usually so quiet and predictable, was now buzzing with energy, both positive and negative. People gathered in groups at local cafes, parks, and even grocery stores, debating what had happened and what it meant for their community. Some felt hopeful that this incident could lead to real change, while others worried that tensions would only deepen. For Ravi, life took on a strange new rhythm. After spending nearly 2 days in the holding cell, he was finally released late one evening. Stepping out of the police station, he was greeted by a mix of cheers and camera flashes. Supporters had gathered outside, holding signs and chanting slogans about justice and fairness. At first, Ravi felt overwhelmed. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, let alone having strangers cheer for him like some kind of hero. But as he looked around at the faces, some familiar, others not, he realized these people weren't just there for him. They were standing up for something bigger, the idea that no one should be treated unfairly regardless of who they are or where they come from. Ravi's father was waiting for him near the car, his expression calm but watchful. When their eyes met, Ravi saw both pride and concern in his father's gaze. "You okay?" the general asked simply, opening the passenger door. Ravi nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure himself. Physically, he was fine, but emotionally, he felt drained. As they drove home in silence, Ravi stared out the window, watching the town roll by. It all looked the same, yet somehow different, like an old painting that had been touched up with brighter colors. Back at home, Ravi tried to process everything. His mother hugged him tightly, her relief evident, while his younger sister peppered him with questions about what it was like in the cell. Despite the warmth of his family, Ravi couldn't shake off the feeling that he was carrying something heavy, a responsibility he hadn't asked for, but couldn't ignore. That night, after everyone went to bed, he sat alone in the living room, scrolling through social media. Post after post praised his courage and resilience, calling him a symbol of hope. While part of him appreciated the support, another part felt uneasy. "I didn't do anything special," he muttered to himself. "I just wanted to have a drink with my friends." But deep down, Ravi knew it wasn't that simple. This wasn't just about him anymore. It never had been. The protests, the debates, the calls for reform, all of it stemmed from a single moment when two officers chose to abuse their authority. And now, whether he liked it or not, Ravi found himself at the heart of a movement demanding accountability and respect. The next morning, Ravi decided to take a walk to clear his head. The air was crisp and the streets were quieter than usual. As he strolled past Joe's bar, he noticed a group of reporters camped outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. For a moment, he considered turning back, but then he remembered something. His father had said during the press conference, "This isn't about hiding from the truth. It's about facing it head on." Taking a deep breath, Ravi walked over to the reporters. "Can I say something?" he asked hesitantly, raising his hand to signal he wasn't running away. The reporters immediately swarmed him, shoving microphones and recorders in his face. Ravi hesitated for a second, then spoke slowly and clearly. "Look, I'm not a hero," he began. "I'm just a regular guy who got caught up in something bigger than myself. What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone. We need to talk about how we treat each other, not just here, but everywhere." His words struck a chord. The reporters scribbled notes furiously, capturing every sentence. Later that day, clips of Ravi's impromptu statement aired on news channels across the country. Viewers praised his humility and honesty, saying it reminded them why this fight mattered. For the first time since the incident, Ravi felt a glimmer of purpose. Maybe this was his chance to make a difference, not by seeking revenge or glory, but by using his voice to spark meaningful conversations. Meanwhile, the two suspended officers were struggling to cope with the backlash. Their colleagues avoided them at work and neighbors whispered behind their backs. One of them, unable to handle the guilt and shame, broke down during a counseling session provided by the department. "We didn't mean for any of this to happen," he confessed tearfully. "We were just trying to prove ourselves." The counselor listened patiently, reminding him that intentions didn't erase consequences. "If you want to move forward," she said, "you'll have to take responsibility for your actions." The other officer, however, remained defiant. He refused to admit fault, insisting that Ravi had provoked them and deserved what he got. This attitude only fueled public anger, leading to renewed calls for stricter consequences. Protesters added his name to their chants, holding banners that read, "Accountability starts here." Even within the police department, opinions were divided. Some believed leniency would send the wrong message, while others argued that harsh punishment might discourage young recruits from joining the force. As the investigation progressed, details emerged that painted a clearer picture of what had gone wrong. Witnesses from Joe's bar came forward, describing how the officers had acted aggressively without provocation. Surveillance footage from the bar corroborated their accounts, showing Ravi remaining calm despite the escalating tension. These revelations strengthened the case against the officers, leaving little room for doubt about their misconduct. Amidst all the chaos, Ravi's father continued to play a guiding role. He visited the police chief regularly, ensuring that promises of reform weren't forgotten amidst the noise. He also reached out to community leaders, encouraging collaboration between law enforcement and civilians. "Change won't happen overnight," he told them during one meeting. "But if we keep pushing in the right direction, we can build trust one step at a time." Inspired by his father's determination, Ravi started thinking about ways he could contribute. He didn't want to rely solely on speeches or interviews. He wanted to create something tangible, something that could bring people together. After discussing ideas with his friends and family, he decided to organize a community event, a dialogue forum where residents and officers could sit down and talk openly about their experiences and concerns. Planning the event wasn't easy. There were logistical challenges, funding issues, and plenty of skepticism from both sides. Some officers balked at the idea of facing the very people they'd clashed with, while residents wondered if the initiative would actually lead to change. or just serve as a PR stunt, but Ravi refused to give up. With help from his father and local organizations, he worked tirelessly to make the event happen. When the day finally arrived, the turnout exceeded everyone's expectations. Hundreds of people packed into the town hall, filling every seat and spilling into the aisles. Officers sat alongside civilians, separated only by shared tables and open hearts. The atmosphere was tense at first, but as stories unfolded and emotions poured out, barriers began to crumble. By the end of the evening, participants exchanged contact information, vowing to continue the conversation beyond the walls of the hall. For Ravi, the success of the event marked a turning point. It wasn't perfect, and there was still much work to be done, but it gave him hope. Hope that even in a world filled with division and distrust, bridges could be built, and that maybe, just maybe, his small act of defiance had sparked something bigger than he ever imagined. This section keeps readers engaged by delving deeper into the emotional and practical responses to the incident. Through Ravi's journey, the narrative explores themes of responsibility, forgiveness, and the power of collective action, setting the stage for further developments in the story. The success of the Community Dialogue Forum gave Ravi a renewed sense of purpose, but it also came with its own set of challenges. While some praised the event as a step toward healing and understanding, others dismissed it as a temporary fix, a band-aid on a much deeper wound. Skeptics argued that talking wasn't enough. Real change required action, accountability, and systemic reforms. For Ravi, this criticism weighed heavily. He knew they weren't wrong. The forum had been a good start, but it was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. In the days following the event, Ravi found himself reflecting on what more he could do. Sitting in his garage, surrounded by tools and half-finished car repairs, he thought about how far things had come since that fateful night at Joe's bar. What started as a simple evening out had spiraled into something he never anticipated, a movement, a cause, a responsibility. It wasn't just about him anymore. People were looking to him for guidance, even if he didn't feel qualified to lead. One afternoon, while tinkering with an old engine, Ravi's phone buzzed. It was a message from his father. "Can we talk?" Curious, Ravi wiped his greasy hands on a rag and called him back. His father sounded unusually serious. "There's something I need to share," he said. They agreed to meet later that evening, at home. When Ravi arrived, his father was waiting in the living room, a folder in hand. "I've been thinking," the general began, motioning for Ravi to sit down. "You've done well so far, better than most would in your position, but if you truly want to make a difference, you'll need structure, something sustainable." He handed Ravi the folder, which contained detailed notes and plans for a long-term initiative aimed at improving relations between law enforcement and civilians. Ravi flipped through the pages, his eyes widening as he read. The proposal outlined a series of workshops, training sessions, and team-building activities designed to foster mutual respect and understanding. It included input from experts in conflict resolution, psychology, and community development. "This is incredible," Ravi said, looking up at his father. "But why are you showing me this?" "Because it's your call," the general replied. "I can help guide you, but this has to be your decision. If you're serious about creating lasting change, this is how you do it. But it won't be easy. It'll take time, effort, and patience." Ravi hesitated. The idea excited him, but it also intimidated him. Could he really pull something like this off? He wasn't a professional organizer or a public figure. He was just a mechanic who liked fixing cars and hanging out with friends. Yet deep down, he knew this was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. If he didn't try, who would? With his father's encouragement, Ravi threw himself into planning the initiative. He reached out to local leaders, educators, and activists, explaining his vision and asking for their support. To his surprise, many were eager to get involved. A retired school teacher offered to design educational materials, while a social worker volunteered to facilitate workshops. Even some officers from the police department expressed interest in participating, though cautiously. As word spread about the initiative, donations poured in from across the town. Business owners contributed funds, restaurants provided meals. For volunteers and residents donated supplies. The overwhelming support buoyed Ravi's spirits, reminding him that he wasn't alone in this fight. Still, not everyone was on board. Critics accused him of overstepping, questioning whether someone without formal training should spearhead such an ambitious project. Others worried that the initiative might lose steam once the initial excitement faded. Despite the naysayers, Ravi pressed on. He worked late nights drafting schedules, coordinating logistics, and reaching out to potential partners. His family pitched in too, offering advice and helping with tasks whenever they could. His mother handled communications, responding to emails and managing social media accounts, while his sister created posters and flyers to promote the events. Slowly but surely, the pieces began falling into place. The first workshop took place on a crisp Saturday morning at the town hall. Dozens of participants showed up, including officers, civilians, and even a few teenagers curious about the buzz. The session started with icebreakers, simple games designed to break down barriers and encourage interaction. At first, conversations were awkward, filled with polite smiles and hesitant exchanges. But as the day went on, walls began to crumble. By lunchtime, groups were laughing together, sharing stories and discussing ways to improve communication. One particularly powerful moment occurred during a panel discussion featuring both officers and residents. A young woman stood up and recounted her experience of being pulled over unfairly earlier that year. Her voice trembled as she described feeling scared and powerless. When she finished speaking, an officer seated nearby stood up. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Not all of us act like that, but I understand why you'd feel that way. We have work to do. Not just as individuals, but as a department." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. For many, it was the first time they'd heard an officer admit fault publicly. Tears welled up in the woman's eyes as she nodded, accepting his apology. Moments like these became the heart of the initiative, raw, honest, and transformative. Weeks turned into months, the workshops gained momentum. More people joined, and the scope expanded to include topics like mental health awareness, de-escalation techniques, and cultural sensitivity. Officers learned practical skills they could apply on the job, while civilians gained insight into the challenges faced by law enforcement. Feedback forms collected after each session revealed a consistent theme. Participants felt heard, respected, and hopeful about the future. But progress wasn't linear. There were setbacks along the way. Some officers resisted participating, claiming the workshops were a waste of time. Others attended reluctantly, only to leave early or disrupt discussions with defensive remarks. Similarly, some residents remained skeptical, refusing to engage with officers no matter how sincere their efforts seemed. These obstacles tested Ravi's resolve, but he refused to give up. Change doesn't happen overnight, he reminded himself and anyone else who doubted the process. Through it all, Ravi's father remained a steady source of support. He attended every workshop, observing quietly from the sidelines and offering encouragement when needed. Though he preferred to stay out of the spotlight, his presence inspired confidence in those around him. "You're doing important work," he told Ravi one evening after a particularly challenging session. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." By the 6th month of the initiative, tangible results began to emerge. Complaints against officers dropped significantly, and trust levels between the community and the police department improved. Officers reported feeling more equipped to handle difficult situations, while residents noted a shift in how they were treated during interactions with law enforcement. Local businesses even reported fewer incidents of vandalism and theft, attributing the decline to better relationships between neighbors and authorities. For Ravi, these changes validated his hard work. But more importantly, they reinforced his belief in the power of collective action. This wasn't about heroes or villains. It was about ordinary people coming together to address shared problems. And though there was still much to be done, Ravi felt optimistic about the road ahead. This part of the story keeps readers engaged by highlighting the challenges and triumphs of Ravi's journey. Through relatable struggles and heartfelt moments, the narrative underscores the importance of perseverance, collaboration, and hope, paving the way for the next chapter in the unfolding story. As the initiative gained traction, Ravi began to notice subtle but meaningful changes in the town. Conversations that once sparked tension now carried a tone of understanding and respect. Strangers greeted each other warmly on the streets, and even small gestures like a nod or a smile felt significant. It wasn't perfect and not everyone was on board, but there was an undeniable shift in the air. The divide between law enforcement and the community hadn't disappeared completely, but it had narrowed. Still, Ravi couldn't shake off the feeling that something was missing. While the workshops were making progress, they mostly focused on addressing issues after they arose. What about preventing them altogether? How could the town create a culture where trust and fairness were the default rather than the exception? These questions haunted him as he worked late into the night, brainstorming ideas to take the initiative further. One evening, while scrolling through social media, Ravi stumbled upon a post from a neighboring town. They had launched a youth mentorship program pairing teenagers with local leaders, including police officers. The idea intrigued him. Young people often felt disconnected from authority figures, viewing them as distant or unapproachable. If kids grew up seeing officers as mentors instead of adversaries, wouldn't that change how they interacted later in life? Excited by the possibility, Ravi decided to pitch the idea at the next planning meeting. He gathered his team, a mix of volunteers, educators, and officers, and presented his vision. What if we start reaching out to kids early? He asked, not just to teach them about laws or safety, but to show them that officers are human too, people who care about their community. The group listened intently, nodding along as Ravi spoke. One of the officers raised a hand hesitantly. "I like the idea," he said, "but how do we make sure it doesn't feel forced? Kids can smell insincerity a mile away." Ravi smiled. "That's why we need authenticity," he replied. "This isn't about putting on a show, it's about building real connections." With the team's support, Ravi set out to design the mentorship program. They partnered with local schools, inviting students to participate voluntarily. Officers signed up as mentors, committing to spend time with their mentees every week. Activities ranged from sports games and art projects to career talks and field trips. The goal was simple: break down stereotypes by fostering friendships. The first session took place at the town park on a sunny Saturday morning. Kids ran around laughing while officers stood awkwardly nearby, unsure of how to act. Some tried striking up conversations, only to be met with shy nods or giggles. But slowly, barriers began to fall. By the end of the day, groups had formed. Naturally, kids teaching officers how to play frisbee, officers showing off tricks with soccer balls. Laughter echoed across the park, replacing the usual silence that existed between generations and roles. One boy, no older than 10, caught Ravi's attention. He sat alone under a tree, sketching in a notebook. Curious, Ravi approached him. "Hey, what are you drawing?" he asked gently. The boy looked up, startled, then held out the notebook. It was a picture of a police car, but instead of wheels, it had wings. "It's a flying cop car," the boy explained, "so it can help people faster." Ravi grinned. "That's awesome. You should show this to Officer Kumar. He loves cool designs." The boy hesitated, but eventually agreed. When Ravi introduced him to the officer, the two bonded over the sketch, discussing ways to upgrade police vehicles. By the end of the session, the boy was grinning ear to ear, his earlier shyness replaced by excitement. Stories like these became common as the mentorship program grew. Parents noticed positive changes in their children, increased confidence, improved communication skills, and a newfound interest in helping others. Officers, too, reported feeling more connected to the community. Many admitted they'd underestimated the impact of spending time with kids. "They remind us why we do this job," one officer confessed during a debriefing session, but not everything went smoothly. There were moments of friction, especially when biases surfaced unexpectedly. During a football game, a teenager accused an officer of letting his teammate win unfairly. The accusation led to a heated argument, leaving both sides frustrated. Instead of brushing it under the rug, Ravi addressed the issue head-on. He called everyone together for a quick discussion, encouraging honest feedback. "Mistakes happen," he said, "but what matters is how we handle them. Let's use this as a learning opportunity." The incident became a turning point. From then on, participants were encouraged to voice concerns openly, knowing their input would be valued. Transparency became a cornerstone of the program, strengthening trust among all involved. Meanwhile, word of the town's efforts spread beyond its borders. Journalists returned to cover the latest developments, highlighting the innovative approaches being used to bridge divides. National organizations praised the initiative, calling it a model for other communities to follow. Invitations poured in for Ravi to speak at conferences and share his experiences. At first, he declined, feeling unqualified to stand alongside experts. But his father urged him to reconsider. "You're living proof that ordinary people can drive extraordinary change," the general said. "That's worth sharing." Reluctantly, Ravi accepted an invitation to speak at a national summit on community policing. Standing on stage before hundreds of attendees, he felt a wave of nerves. But as he began speaking, his fear melted away. He talked about his arrest, the protests, and the journey that followed. He shared stories of transformation, from skeptical residents opening up during workshops to shy kids befriending officers. His message was clear: change starts with connection. When he finished, the audience erupted into applause. People lined up afterward to thank him, many saying his story had inspired them to take action in their own towns. For the first time, Ravi allowed himself to feel proud, not of what he'd achieved individually, but of the collective effort that had made it possible. Back home, the momentum continued. More residents joined the initiative, bringing fresh ideas and energy. A local artist painted a mural celebrating unity, featuring portraits of officers and civilians working side by side. Another volunteer organized a storytelling night where participants shared personal experiences of overcoming prejudice and finding common ground. Each event deepened the sense of belonging within the community. Yet amidst the successes, Ravi remained grounded. He knew better than anyone that progress was fragile. One misstep could undo months of hard work. That awareness kept him vigilant, constantly seeking ways to improve and adapt. He also reminded himself and others that this wasn't about perfection. It was about persistence. By the end of the year, the town had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. Crime rates dropped, neighborly bonds strengthened, and mutual respect became the norm rather than the exception. The police department adopted new policies based on feedback from the workshops, ensuring accountability remained a priority. And though challenges still arose, the community tackled them together, armed with the tools and trust they'd built along the way. For Ravi, the journey had been anything but easy. It had tested his patience, resilience, and faith in humanity. But it had also shown him the power of hope and collaboration. As he stood overlooking the town square one evening, watching families laugh and chat under twinkling lights, he felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. This wasn't the ending, it was just the beginning. And for now, that was enough. This part of the story keeps readers engaged by showcasing the evolution of Ravi's efforts and the ripple effects of his actions. Through relatable struggles and heartwarming victories, the narrative reinforces themes of perseverance, empathy, and unity, setting the stage for the final chapters of the story. By the time the new year rolled around, Ravi's initiative had become a cornerstone of the town's identity. What had started as a response to injustice had grown into something far greater, a movement that brought people together in ways no one could have imagined. The workshops, mentorship programs, and community events weren't just activities. They were threads weaving a stronger, more united fabric. But despite the progress, Ravi couldn't help but wonder if it would last. Change was fragile, after all, and maintaining momentum required constant effort. One chilly morning, as Ravi sipped his coffee at the kitchen table, His father walked in holding a newspaper. "Your front page news again," the general said with a small smile, sliding the paper across the table. The headline read, "Small Town Leads the Way in Bridging Divides." Beneath it was a photo of Ravi standing shoulder to shoulder with an officer and a teenager during one of the mentorship sessions. For a moment, Ravi felt a swell of pride, but it quickly faded. "What happens when the cameras leave?" he asked, staring at the picture. "When the spotlight shifts somewhere else, will we still care this much?" His father sat down opposite him, folding his hands thoughtfully. "That's the real test," he replied. "Sustaining change isn't about grand gestures or headlines. It's about the little things, the everyday choices we make to treat each other better." Ravi nodded, though doubt lingered in his mind. He knew his father was right, but putting those words into practice wasn't easy. Keeping the initiative alive meant finding new ways to keep people engaged, especially as life returned to its usual rhythm. Work schedules, school commitments, and personal priorities often pulled participants in different directions. Attendance at some events began to dip and enthusiasm waned slightly. It was a reminder that even the most passionate movements face challenges over time. Determined not to let the momentum slip away, Ravi decided to shake things up. He called a meeting with his core team, volunteers who had been with him since the beginning, and proposed a bold idea: a town-wide festival celebrating unity and collaboration. It wouldn't just be another event, it would be a celebration of everything they'd accomplished so far, while also inspiring continued growth. The group loved the concept, but organizing such a large-scale event came with its own set of hurdles. Funding was tight, resources were limited, and coordinating logistics seemed daunting. Yet Ravi refused to back down. "If we can bring the whole town together for this," he told the team, "we'll prove that our work isn't just a phase, it's a way of life." Word of the festival spread quickly, reigniting excitement among residents. People rallied behind the idea, offering whatever help they could. Local businesses donated food and supplies, musicians volunteered to perform, and artists created vibrant decorations. Even the police department pitched in, helping set up stages and booths. The sense of collective ownership gave the festival a special energy, turning it into more than just an event. It became a symbol of hope. On the day of the festival, the town square transformed into a bustling hub of activity. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, music filled the air, and laughter echoed through the streets. Booths lined the area, showcasing everything from handmade crafts to interactive exhibits on conflict resolution. Kids darted between games and face painting stations while adults mingled over plates of homemade snacks. Officers stood side by side with residents, sharing stories and smiles. At the center of it all was a stage where speakers took turns addressing the crowd. One speaker, a young girl named Priya, captured everyone's attention. She had participated in the mentorship program and now considered one of the officers her role model. "Before, I thought cops were scary," she admitted, clutching the microphone nervously. "But Officer Mehta taught me how to ride a bike, helped me with my homework, and even came to my birthday party. Now, whenever I see him, I feel safe." Her words brought tears to many eyes, including Officer Mehta's. As the audience erupted into applause, Ravi watched from the sidelines, overwhelmed by emotion. This was why he had started this journey, to show people that connections mattered more than divisions. Later that evening, as fireworks lit up the sky, Ravi found himself standing next to the same boy who had drawn the flying police car months earlier. The boy, now brimming with confidence, tugged on Ravi's sleeve. "Do you think we could build a flying cop car someday?" he asked earnestly. Ravi chuckled, crouching down to meet the boy's gaze. "Maybe not today," he said, "but if you keep dreaming big, who knows what's possible?" The festival marked a turning point, not because it solved every problem, but because it reminded everyone of their shared humanity. It reinforced the idea that progress wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence. Every handshake, every conversation, every act of kindness contributed to the larger goal of building trust. But even as the town celebrated, shadows loomed on the horizon. Not everyone was happy about the changes. A vocal minority continued to criticize Ravi and his efforts, accusing him of undermining authority or promoting unrealistic ideals. Some officers grumbled about the added responsibilities, while a few residents dismissed the initiatives as superficial fixes. These voices, though quieter now, served as a reminder that resistance to change never fully disappeared. Ravi understood their concerns. He truly did. Change wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. There would always be skeptics, doubters, and naysayers, but instead of letting their negativity discourage him, he chose to focus on the majority who believed in the cause. They were the ones showing up, volunteering, and working toward a better future, and that was enough to keep him going. As weeks turned into months, Ravi shifted his focus to sustainability. He worked with local leaders to establish committees, responsible for overseeing ongoing projects, ensuring they remained inclusive and effective. He also collaborated with schools to integrate lessons on empathy and communication into curriculums, planting seeds of understanding in the next generation. Meanwhile, the police department implemented permanent reforms based on feedback from the workshops. Officers received regular training on de-escalation techniques, cultural sensitivity, and mental health awareness. Supervisors conducted monthly check-ins to address concerns and celebrate successes. Slowly but surely, the culture within the I department began to shift, from one of authority to one of partnership. For Ravi, these developments brought a sense of closure. His arrest, once a source of anger and frustration, had sparked a chain reaction that touched countless lives. It hadn't erased the pain of that night, but it had transformed it into something meaningful. Justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It was about creating opportunities for growth and healing. One evening, as Ravi closed up his garage after a long day of work, his father appeared in the doorway. "How are you holding up?" the general asked, leaning against the frame. "I'm good," Ravi replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "Tired, but good." His father nodded approvingly. "You've come a long way, son. Most people wouldn't have had the courage to turn something bad into something good." Ravi smiled faintly. "I didn't do it alone. None of this would have happened without everyone pitching in, including you." The general placed a hand on his shoulder. "True. But don't underestimate your role. You saw a problem and refused to look away. That takes guts." As they walked back to the house together, Ravi reflected on his journey. It hadn't been perfect, and it certainly hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. The town wasn't utopia, and challenges still lay ahead. But for the first time, in a long time, Ravi felt hopeful, not just for himself but for everyone around him. This part of the story keeps readers engaged by exploring the complexities of sustaining change and the importance of perseverance. Through relatable struggles and uplifting moments, the narrative highlights the power of community and resilience, paving the way for the final chapter. Months turned into a year since that fateful night at Joe's bar, and the town had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. What began as an isolated incident of injustice had blossomed into a movement that redefined relationships, trust, and unity. Yet for Ravi, the journey wasn't just about what he'd achieved. It was about who he'd become along the way. One crisp morning, as sunlight filtered through the trees, Ravi stood outside his garage, watching the world wake up. The streets were alive with activity, kids on their way to school, neighbors chatting over fences, and officers patrolling with smiles instead of scowls. It was a scene that would have seemed impossible a year ago, but now felt almost ordinary. And that, Ravi realized, was the true measure of success, when change became so ingrained in daily life that it no longer felt extraordinary. Later that day, Ravi received an unexpected visitor, a man in his late 40s wearing a suit and tie. He introduced himself as a representative from a national foundation focused on community development. "We've been following your work," he said, extending a handshake. "It's inspiring. We'd like to offer you a grant to expand your initiatives beyond this town." Ravi blinked, taken aback. "Beyond this town?" he repeated, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Yes," the man replied. "Your model is replicable, with some guidance and resources, Other communities could benefit from what you've built here. The offer left Ravi speechless. On one hand, it was validation of everything he'd worked for, a chance to amplify his efforts and reach even more people. On the other hand, it came with responsibility. Expanding meant stepping out of his comfort zone, navigating unfamiliar territory, and trusting others to carry the torch. Could he do it? Did he want to? That evening, Ravi brought the proposal to his father. They sat together in the living room, the document spread out on the coffee table. "What do you think?" Ravi asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. His father leaned back, considering the question carefully. "It's a big step," he admitted. "But isn't that what you wanted all along? To make a difference, not just here, but everywhere?" Ravi nodded slowly. "I guess I never thought it would actually happen." "Well, it has," his father said with a smile. "And if anyone can pull it off, it's you." Encouraged by his father's words, Ravi accepted the grant. Over the next few months, he traveled to nearby towns, sharing his story and helping them adapt the programs he'd created. Each visit brought new challenges, but also new lessons. He learned how to tailor initiatives to fit different communities, how to listen to unique needs, and how to inspire others to take ownership of their own journeys. Back home, the town continued to thrive. The mentorship program expanded, pairing older teens with younger children to create a ripple effect of positive influence. Workshops evolved into ongoing support groups where residents and officers discussed not only problems but solutions. Even the annual festival became a tradition, drawing visitors from surrounding areas eager to experience the spirit of unity firsthand. Yet, amidst the growth, Ravi remained grounded. He often reminded himself, and others, that progress wasn't linear. There would always be setbacks, moments of doubt, and voices of resistance, but those obstacles didn't define the journey, they were part of it. What mattered was how people responded to them, with courage, empathy, and determination. One evening, during a quiet moment at home, Ravi found himself flipping through an old photo album. Among the pictures was one taken shortly after his arrest, the mugshot that had gone viral. For a long time he'd hated that image, seeing it as a reminder of humiliation and anger. But now, as he looked at it again, he saw something else. Resilience. That night had been painful, yes, but it had also been the spark that ignited change. His mother walked in and noticed him staring at the picture. "Hard to believe how far we've come, isn't it?" she said softly. Ravi smiled. "Yeah. Sometimes, I wonder if it's all real." "It is," she assured him, sitting beside him. "You made it real. Not alone, of course, but because you refused to give up." Her words stayed with him long after she left the room. Refusing to give up. That was the thread connecting every chapter of this story. The arrests, the protests, the workshops, the festivals. It wasn't about grand gestures or heroic acts. It was about persistence. About believing in the possibility of better days, even when the road ahead seemed uncertain. As the months passed, Ravi's reputation grew beyond the town. Invitations to speak at conferences and events poured in from across the country. At first he hesitated, fearing he might lose touch with his roots. But then he remembered why he started this journey: to show people that change was possible no matter where you came from or who you were. So he embraced the opportunities, using each platform to share not just his story, but the stories of everyone who had contributed to the movement. At one such event, a young woman approached him after his speech. Her eyes glistened with tears as she thanked him. "Your story gives me hope," she said. "My brother was treated unfairly by the police last year, and I didn't know what to do. Hearing how you turned pain into purpose, it makes me believe we can do the same." Ravi placed a hand on her shoulder. "You can," he said firmly. "And you don't have to wait for someone else to start. Change begins with us, with ordinary people deciding to do something extraordinary." By the end of the year, the impact of Ravi's work stretched far beyond anything he'd imagined. Towns modeled their programs after his, schools incorporated lessons on empathy and collaboration, and law enforcement agencies adopted reforms inspired by his vision. Yet, despite the accolades and recognition, Ravi stayed humble. This wasn't about him, it never had been. It was about the power of collective action, the strength of a community united by shared values. On New Year's Eve, as fireworks lit up the sky, Ravi stood in the town square surrounded by friends, family, and neighbors. His father raised a toast, his voice carrying over the cheers. "To a brighter tomorrow," he said, looking at Ravi with pride, "and to everyone who helped build it." Ravi smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but he knew they were ready. Together, they had proven that even in the face of adversity, hope could prevail. Justice wasn't just about fixing wrongs. It was about creating a future where wrongs happened less often, where people listened, understood, and cared. As the clock struck midnight, Ravi took a moment to soak it all in: the laughter, the music, the sense of belonging. This was his home, his community, his family. And though the journey wasn't over, he knew they were headed in the right direction, one step at a time. This final part ties together the themes of resilience, unity, and hope, leaving readers with a lasting impression of the power of perseverance and humanity. Through relatable moments and heartfelt reflections, the narrative concludes on an uplifting note, celebrating the triumph of ordinary people doing extraordinary things.